You are a comedy writer, most well known for your sitcoms, The IT Crowd and Father Ted.
Mm-hmm.
When did you first know you wanted to become a comedy writer?
The first time I deliberately made someone laugh was when I was a little kid, and I was kind of victim of bullying and a constant kind of derision aimed at me. So one day someone said something about my ears, calling me Spock. That was one of my nicknames. And I said, it was a very long and strangled, I mean, it was such a strangled joke, but I said, if you don't shut up, I'll beam you off Starship Enterprise. And the person laughed in surprise that I had taken something he'd thrown at me and thrown it back like that. And it was such a surprise and such a shock that I guess I just started getting fascinated by what made people laugh, and also by self-deprecation as a tool, a comedy tool. I read Woody Allen. He used to write these short essays for the New Yorker, and I remember they just blew my mind how funny they were. And he would often use, that kind of joke. Like there's a famous Woody Allen joke in one film where he says he works in someone's talking to him, and he says, I work in a kind of a showgirls, what is this? He says something like, I work with showgirls, I do fittings of costumes and stuff like that. And the guy says, how much do you get a week? Or he says, what's the pay? And he goes, 200 quid a week. It's not much, but it's all I can afford. And those kinds of like pure surprise jokes just kind of lit me up. And the Jewish comedy in general, I went on to that and started enjoying that. So when I was a kid, I actually wanted to be Martin Scorsese. I wanted to be a very serious director who threw the camera around to music and slow motion and all that sort of stuff. But it wasn't where my natural talents brought me. So I started writing music journalism. And when I did that, the thing I was best at was just being funny. I could make people laugh with words. And I just kept it up, really.
And what is it like? What is it exactly about comedy writing that you love? Like, what is it about that gets you going?
That it produces an actual physical response in people. I think maybe if people sneezed, I would like to do that too, because it's like having a bit of magic control over someone. When you can elicit a laugh, it's a magical thing, and it's nice to elicit a laugh. It's a very joyous thing rather than eliciting any other kind of response. I think it's the only joy. It's like a definite good thing to elicit a laugh. So doing that, what a nice thing to devote your life to, I think Seinfeld said, he said that the first time he made someone laugh, he made milk come out of a guy's nose. And as it was happening and the guy was trying to recover, he thought, I want to do this for a living, and that's kind of how I feel. If I can make people explode, It's
always a risk though, because it's like, or maybe more for stand-up comedians, like, because sometimes you bomb and it's like, why am I putting myself out there to be humiliated in the hopes that someone will laugh,
Yeah. That's why I felt safer doing it and giving it up to other people to do. I think stand-up comedy, I did a little bit of it recently, and it's not for me really. I like coming up with new ideas, and stand-up comedy is really about getting an act and honing it and doing it again and again and again until it's like as sharp and as economical as it can be. And I just don't have the patience,
When did you realize you were good at it? Comedy writing?
I think when I did these debates at school, I used to, I'm afraid they were half plagiarized from Woody Allen. But I used to use his jokes, and then I would just start putting in my own. And the surprise came when my own jokes were getting as big a laugh as Woody Allen, who I really admired. That's when I started to think, okay, this is something possibly I'm good at. And I never lost the knack, I guess. I think there's what's his name? Murakami, the Japanese author. He actually wrote out excerpts, I think, from Hemingway or F. Scott Fitzgerald in Japanese translated them and just wrote them out just to see what it would feel like to write like the people he admired. And in the same way, Woody Allen, by plagiarizing him, I kind of absorbed some of the regular things that would make people laugh that he was good at. And yeah, after a while, I just kind of adopted it to my own voice, and found that I could do it more often than not. You know, my instinctive thing with people is to find what's funny about what they just said, you know, and try and build on that, because yeah, I don't know, it's just a nice thing to do, you know, it's fun.
Yeah, of course. There's a concept in the comedy world called punching up and punching down.
Sure.
Yeah. So, which is to punch up, essentially. Don't punch down, make fun of people that are in a more privileged position than you. Now, you don't accept this principle.
No.
Why is this?
I think it's a poisonous principle. I think, first of all, it's often the people who say these things are middle-class people who feel that there are some people who are below them and they're not allowed to make fun of them. I don't think that is true at all. I think that we're all a part of humanity. Everybody on every, say, level of privilege is as funny as everyone else. And when you exclude them from comedy, you're excluding whole swathes of the population from, the chance of being funny. If I had that rule, I wouldn't have written the character of, I don't know, what's a good example? Jen, I guess. People would say I was sexist because Jen in the IT crowd didn't know anything about computers, but that was her comic flaw. That's what made her funny. If she hadn't had a comic flaw, she would just be an observer, kind of passively talking about the men who were funny, which is what a lot of comedies did at one stage. There were some shows, and the women were just there to provide a kind of running commentary on the men. I never wanted that. I always wanted people to be active participants in the comedy. And, when you say you can't punch down, it means that there's whole groups you can't make jokes about. You can't explore their lives. The upshot of that is you get a less diverse cast, So I always feel a satirist, comedians should punch every which way, up, down, left, right. The important thing is to reflect all of humanity, not just the people who you've arbitrarily placed above you.
Oh, that kind of makes me scared, because I can't imagine like a white person making fun of like a non-white person in our day and age.
Sure, but I had Richard Ayoade in my show. Richard was born to a black and white parents, but he, I guess, codes as black, you might say. It's hard to explain. If you're making jokes about color, just about color, I don't think I ever did make one joke about color, then yeah, you're on the wrong track. But if you're just trying to create a character, I don't know, it just makes it more. I was talking to you today about the idea of an idea I had. I better not say it in case anyone steals it. but like a joke. It was a comedy about DEI measures,
which is
diversity and inclusion, or what is it?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion,
which is supposed to be a good thing.
Supposed to be a good thing, but it's not a good thing if it's a box ticking exercise for a high stakes job, for instance. So yeah, I think the bizarre thing about that is if you made a movie about DEI measures, you'd actually have a diverse cast, and who doesn't want that, So I don't know, it's just one of those things. They make up all these rules. The rules are made up by people who don't understand comedy, who have I feel, superior attitude to the people they're saying we're not allowed to make fun of. So I just want my comedy to reflect the world. I don't want it just to reflect a small stratum of the world, Is stratum a word?
Let's make it one.
Yeah, okay. It is now.
I suppose if you did want to make the comedy world more in that way, we should just be able to punch anywhere. What would you suggest people do? Start punching anywhere? But who's going to be the first one to do it? It's like, oh.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I would say study the people who do it really well. There's a guy in America, Andrew. His name's jumped out of my head. Andrew something. Huh?
Andrew
Yeah,
Schultz.
Schultz.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Dave Chappelle.
Dave Chappelle is another good example. Like Dave Chappelle did that routine. He's a straight guy, but he did that routine about the car driving with all the LGB in it. It's a brilliant routine, but one of the reasons why it's particularly good is when you watch it, you kind of realize, oh, Dave must know someone who's gay, who's told him that these are the tensions within the group, because it's not ignorant. It's actually really dead on. There is a tension between lesbians and gay men, and his kind of zeroing in on what queer means or what it doesn't mean, this incredibly fluid term that can mean anything that people want it to mean. That was really funny too, and it was really well observed. So it's almost like you can do anything as long as it's not coming from a place of ignorance or just a kind of lazy understanding of what people are. It has to be informed, so that even the people who are being talked about will watch it and enjoy it, And Schultz is like that too. You can see Schultz, he picks people from the audience. They'll be whatever minority, his audiences seem incredibly diverse, and he'll find someone, and he's a white guy, could not be whiter, he looks like a cop, and he will find someone and start asking them questions and know exactly where they're from and be able to do jokes about the specific, part of society that they're from, and they love it. Because they're not being excluded. And it's not like a bunch of jokes about white people, So it comes from just being a little bit smart, a little bit informed, and generous, I mean, it would be the easiest thing for me to just have two white characters, both of them straight, and do lots of jokes about things that I'm comfortable with. But I'd rather invent a gay character simply so I could do gay jokes, because, I know so many gay people, it would be a waste of the experience of hanging out with them if I didn't.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, let's move on. I was reading your book, Tough Crowd, and something stuck out to me. So we're living in this sort of time where people are afraid to speak their mind because they don't want to get cancelled or be seen as hateful. And you said you would forgive musicians for mob-pleasing behaviour, but not comedians. You believe comedians should speak truth to power. What do you mean by that?
Well, I guess musicians are funny. I used to be a rock journalist, and when I interviewed them, it was rarely good because they express themselves through the music, and when you sit them down and start talking to them about the music, they clam up, and as well they should. I think it was Laurie Anderson who said that writing about music is like talking. What is it? She said writing about music is like dancing to architecture, and so that's what I found time and time again. These guys, they couldn't. So they're kind of. Skill is in expressing themselves through instruments, through a crowd of people, to a crowd of people, and that's it. They don't need to be political. They don't need to be anything. They just need to create this joyous sound. Whereas with comedians, I mean, I read a book called "Jesters Are Everywhere," and it's a really interesting book about. Jesters throughout history. The writer, she found all these excerpts in different books from right down through the ages about jesters. And she said it's really interesting. She said it's a tradition that has been in nearly every culture she could find. There's always someone who's providing that role. And she said what was interesting was she never saw anyone say, the king brought this strange little fellow called a jester. Right? The idea of the jester seems to have been there for forever, So here's something that has an incredibly long tradition. And the jester is the person who kind of tells the king what the man on the street is thinking, right? So all the kind of people who are bowing and scraping to the king, the jester is the one who comes along and cuts through all that and tells the king what's really happening down on the ground so the king can make good decisions. That's the way I look at it anyway, you know. And sometimes the jester will really go on the edge of getting the king very, very angry to do that, you know. That's not today's generation of, like basically what happened was the mob ascended the throne. And the thing about the mob is you will never be able to please all of them. It's a group of people.
Yeah,
so
which group? Who's the mob?
the mob is made up of anyone who feels like complaining. You know, we used to, I remember one guy who used to do a satirical show in the UK, and they had a clip of a cheese rolling thing in the UK. Do you know the one where they run down a hill after a cheese? It's this crazy thing. It's like,
I wish.
It's like this big steep hill. They get a circular cheese, roll it down, and like 100 people just run down after. And it's so steep that they just end up tumbling and falling and stuff like that. Anyway, they had a joke about this, and someone wrote and said, well, my brother was killed during one of these events, you know, so, you know, why are you making jokes about it? And it was like, well, we wouldn't be able to make jokes about anything if every single person who's affected by a joke was able to write in and complain about it. That's the situation we have now. We have a situation where it's impossible to please every single member of the mob that have ascended the throne. So people, as a result, have just shut up. They've just kind of censored themselves. They've decided that whatever the mob thinks is what they think. And as a result, you get all these neutered comedians who self-police. And, you know, like outside of Chappelle and a few others, people like Shane Gillis, there's very few people who, you know, do you see things going viral? You used to see comedy things going viral all the time. It's kind of stopped, weirdly. You know, you don't see it as much.
What kind of things would go viral? What do you mean? Because I see a lot of comedians on my Instagram reels, and like, what do you mean?
Well, I'll give you the example of The Daily Show. Jon Stewart used to host the Daily Show, and he was, you know, straight white guy. He was usually talking about Trump or someone like that, and he would go viral every week. Some rant of his would go viral. It would be really strong. The arguments would be very well crafted, and the comedy would be top class, you know? Then Trevor Noah took over. It was as if The Daily Show just went off the air, you know? His stuff never went viral. And I think that's because wokeism took over as a principle. And the comedy just became a little bit toothless, a little bit frightened. I think that's the example I would choose. Trevor Noah, he may as well not have been on. You know, no one saw him. The Daily Show disappeared for years.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's probably not something of my generation.
Yeah.
Okay, Graham. When I was doing some research on you to prepare for the interview, I Googled you, and one of the first things that came up was your Wikipedia page that said you're a comedy writer and an anti-trans activist.
Yeah.
So why are people calling you an anti-trans activist?
Because Wikipedia calls me an anti-trans activist.
Really?
Yeah, we've tried to change that several times, and it changes back within 15 minutes.
Why are people changing it to Graham Linehan is an anti-trans activist? Because
that's been the tactic for at least the last 6 years, which is when anyone brings up this issue of the tensions that exist between women's rights and trans rights in certain areas, like single-sex spaces, rape crisis centres, sports, rather than address those issues, they've simply been calling us anti-trans and trying to, you know, destroy our livelihoods, report us to work tribunals. So many of my friends have been tied up in court for years and in these tribunals for years because rather than addressing the issues, trans activists portray us as bigots and try and get us cancelled.
Okay, a lot to say there. Let's start. Okay, so what got you interested in talking about this sort of conflict between trans rights and women's rights?
Well, there was an episode of the IT Crowd where I had a joke that was about one of the characters falls in love with a trans woman. And the joke was that she maintains a lot of male qualities when after her transition. It was played by a woman, very funny actress. And the joke was that she retains all this male pattern behavior, I guess. And the pushback to it was oddly aggressive. It was oddly, I would say, male. And I was kind of surprised by how aggressive and hostile it was. And I didn't realize that this was the time when these kinds of new ideas were popping up on websites like Tumblr and Reddit. And the stuff had already been percolating in American academia for years, but it was just leaking out onto the internet. So I didn't realize this was going on. Then, for the next, I'd say, 10 years, because of the experience of getting that pushback, my ears would always prick up when I heard the issue being talked about. And I kind of started noticing things. Like I noticed, for instance, that women were being hounded offline. I'd just been through a kind of online campaign called Gamergate, where I thought I was on the side of women, because the narrative of Gamergate was that it was a misogynistic hate campaign to drive women off the internet, So I would notice, for instance, that one thing that these 4chan types of websites would do is they would pose as women in order to cause confusion. There was a famous one called Operation Lollipop, where all these 4chan blokes posed as black women and created a hashtag. I think it was called something like End Father's Day. And they pretended that they believed that Father's Day was racist. So they did that literally just to make it look like black women had gone mad, and had become just crazy anti-male activists, whatever. And it worked, it had an effect. So I thought, okay, posing as women online and pretending that you're fighting for things that women want is wrong, right? I thought that's not a good thing to do. So then I noticed the left had started doing it. And the left, when they did it, were just getting a completely different reaction. They were lauded. They were told they were brave and stunning. They were, they had their ass kissed like no other group of people. And I noticed that these same people were using the same kind of language that the Gamergate trolls used to drive women offline. It was all about shaming women, casting them as bigots. It was even worse, in fact, than Gamergate. So I just started thinking, well, this is wrong too. So I will just be consistent and I'll continue to call it out. So unfortunately, the moment I went for the exact same principle of men saying they're women online and kind of trolling women, the world crashed down around my ears, Now,
this group that you're talking about, you were talking about transgender women?
No, not necessarily. I'm talking a lot about what you might call allies, As with every other part of kind of woke culture, it always seems to be middle-class white people who are pushing this stuff more than anyone. Also, I have a problem with the word transgender. I think it's meaningless. I think I know it when this, and this is something as well that got me cancelled, because the word trans, a lot.
I can see why. Sorry, yeah. Carry on, Jesus.
But the word trans was understood by most people to mean transsexual.
Yes.
And we all kind of have sympathy for anyone who goes through very serious steps to change their bodies like that. And I always agreed that, they need to be protected. They need to have proper health care, all that sort of thing. But I noticed that transgender was coming in, which didn't mean the same thing. Transgender meant everything from transsexuals to some bloke who paints his fingernails black, and I've seen examples of this. Someone paints their fingernails black, calls themselves queer, and demands to be let into women's spaces.
Okay, that sounds like hyperbolic. Give me some examples.
Oh gosh, what's a good example? Well, I'll give you a very good example. Eddie Izzard. Eddie Izzard is simply a cross-dresser. He's not transsexual. He goes into women's spaces and uses them without a second thought. Why is he doing that? That's abusive. I think the men who do that are abusive.
And does would he be considered like a transgender woman? Does he consider himself a...
He's adopted the phrasing.
Am I misgendering someone? Am I going to get cancelled? Holy shit!
You're already in trouble for speaking to me, so you should think about it.
Well, I'm a big believer that we should talk to people we disagree with. We should humanize our political opponents.
Sure, but do you disagree with me on this?
Well, I'm wondering, but we're not quite there yet. So
okay.
what I'm concerned about is that you're arguing extremes. So I saw something today on the internet, on Twitter, as per usual, which is, what did it say? Dykes love girl dick. And everyone's like, oh my God, this movement is so insane. And I'm like, that particular person is insane, but can we paint the whole of transgender people as what this one person is saying? Like, we argue in extremes, don't we?
Sure. But that person was part of a group of people who regularly turn up at women's rights events and shout abuse at them from the sidelines. If the wider community of trans-identified people don't agree with that argument, they should say so, but they don't, you know? And also that attitude that lesbians are perfectly happy to sleep with fully intact men if they call themselves women is homophobic.
I agree with you. And I saw a transgender woman on YouTube who was saying, this was a couple of years ago now, she was saying lesbians who don't like girl dick or sleep with transgender women they're sort of fetishizing. What was it? She was
I know these arguments.
If you're a lesbian and you don't date trans women, you're fetishizing female genitals. And I'm like, what the heck? And I just got really angry. But now, I've taken some time to sort of look at everyone's perspective and realize most transgender women aren't actually trying to date lesbians.
I don't know. I've seen so many examples of it. One of the reasons I got into trouble was because I joined a lesbian dating app called Her because I wanted to show that men were doing it for real in their droves, and a lot of the men who were doing it, they would, some of them had lipstick on and dressed like women, but others just looked like I look like now. I didn't do anything except tilt my head for the photograph, and it's like these men are invading lesbian only spaces. When I was in Tasmania, I met a young woman who is trying to get lesbian only events. She can't do it. She's banned from having these events. I know another young woman in London, Jenny Watson. She tried to have a speed dating event for lesbians, and they just get disrupted, and people just stand up and start shouting them down, and men are trying to force their way into it. I've never seen the kind of homophobia that's happening now under the umbrella of transgender. And the thing about it is, and the thing I always thought, well, I'll explain this and everyone will understand, or well, I'll point this out and everyone will see I'm not a bigot. But because of this fight, I now know more trans people than the people who are calling me transphobic, I know, but admittedly, most of them are transsexuals. They're not like transgender. Most of them are transsexuals. But still, it's like, surely this was the group that we were always told were the ones that were most vulnerable and most in need of protection. But no, trans rights activists, there's a phrase for transsexuals that a lot of the most virulent trans rights activists use, and it's true scum.
What's that mean?
It means transsexuals who believe that to be trans, you do have to have the surgery and you do have to go through all these processes, They think that they are gatekeeping the trans identity, So I noticed what I saw was some very homophobic attitudes. I noticed that women, whenever they tried to get together to talk about these things, they were shouted down, they were spat at. You saw what happened when Posey Parker came over here last year, what happened in Albert Park in New Zealand, like a 71-year-old woman being punched 3 times in the face by a 20-year-old man. I just couldn't ignore it.
And it is interesting, depending on what media you watch as well. I mean, you seem to have quite a wide scope. There is one point that I want to say before about the woman trying to organize, lesbian-only dating events. I do notice they seem to amplify, this is for biological females only. Mm-hmm. I just wonder if they didn't say that. Would they have transgender women trying to? I just think it's amplifying this culture war by saying biological females only. People do that on their dating profiles as well. I just wouldn't say it, Graham. Like, obviously, watch what I say here. You know, I obviously only date biological females because I can't help it. That's my attraction. But
they would call you a bigot. They would call you a bigot for
only if I said on my
dating. They would call you a genital fetishist for that.
Well, the extremes would. I don't think many transgender people would.
That's mainstream trans activism. It is mainstream trans activism. It really is. I mean, mainstream trans activism is violently phrased, harasses lesbians. It's not a good movement, you know. And the thing I would say is, if you look and if you pay attention, you can find many trans people who are in absolute despair at what's being done in their name, you know. Like, who's a good example? Miranda Yardley is a friend of mine, who sometimes is known as Tina, which is very funny because he's huge. And Miranda is like, you know, he will go to women's events and stuff, but he'll deliberately dress down because he knows there's a lot of women there who are really angry and upset about what's been happening over the last few years. I mean, it's this simple. Basically, if you can have a lesbian event and no biological men turn up, everything's fine. But if you can't have a lesbian event at all because biological men want to turn up and you're saying no, that's a problem. That's homophobia, you know?
Like I said before, I wouldn't put biological females only on my dating profile, even though it's sort of implied.
But you shouldn't have to. The word woman should mean woman. It should mean woman only. It should mean biological woman.
But you're making it sound like all these transgender people are going to come to these lesbian events and just start taking it over. Like, I think there's like one or two.
That's what's been happening. Have you ever heard of Mitchfest?
No.
Mitchfest was a big lesbian festival in the US.
Actually, I have.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I got shut down because they didn't want to include.
Yes, there was a site set up next to it called Camp Trans, and they used to drive motorbikes around to disrupt it. They used to try and get in any way they could, and eventually Mitchfest had to close down because of the constant abuse from this group. You know, then when it ended, I don't know whether it was months or years afterwards, one attendee of Mitchfest and her partner and their son was murdered by a member of Camp Trans. He killed all three of them. When they came to the house, he came out, he was covered in blood, you know? Yeah. That's like Dana Rivers, I think was the name of the murderer. And the person who invented the trans flag was also a member of Camp Trans. It's shocking. If you look into it, you know, the people who are at Camp Trans are a fairly dodgy group of people, you know. So I don't know. I just think that is what's happening. If you're, say, for instance, if you're not trying to set up a female only event, you won't come across this problem. You won't notice it. But if you do, they come down on you like a ton of bricks. And Jenny, my friend in London, you know, she's got PTSD from what she's gone through at the hands of these people. So
don't try and create a lesbian only event.
No, do.
But see what happens.
It's more important now than ever. Yeah. Like, the more voices speaking up and saying, no, hang on a sec, this is not an unreasonable request. Same with the rape crisis centres. There's a rape crisis centre in Scotland. J.K. Rowling set one up called Beera's Place. And she had to say this is biological women only because they successfully managed to close down every rape crisis centre that was female only. The person who closed it down was a trans-identified man named Midral Wadha. He's now the CEO of Rape Crisis Scotland. He and his partner made millions from closing down these other centres. And now he runs a rape crisis centre. And when they were talking to him about, they had him on some, I would say, traitorous feminist podcast, The Guilty Feminist. And they had him on and they were saying, well, what do you do if you have someone who comes in who wants a female-only service? And he said something along the lines of, you have to remember, even bigots get raped too. You know, it's an appalling situation that any woman, I know two women, including a young woman who was raped in her college, they both wrote to me with long accounts of what they went through for my website, and they're self-excluding. They don't want to go to Scottish Rape Crisis Services because they don't want to get lectured by a carpetbagger like Midral Wadha, you know? So it's a problem.
It is interesting hearing you come up with all these examples because, in my head, I still think it's extreme. Like, I still think you are plucking out extremes, but maybe it seems like people don't have access.
Yeah.
They don't understand what's happening.
You try and look up someone like Midral Wadha. There's a mention of Midral Wadha on my Wikipedia page, and all it says is that I doxed him. And I didn't dox him. We rubbed out his address. We didn't use it. But the Wikipedia page, the way that could be phrased is Graham Linehan exposed this person who joined Edinburgh Rape Crisis and did not tell anyone he was trans. So the whole of the information around this issue is slanted. Like, as you say, when you said, as soon as you said, I Googled your name, you're not going to get anything good on me for pages, And I have friends who, the way they find out, if they ever find an issue that is worrying them or confusing them about this particular debate, they will write the thing they're searching for, and they'll also write the Glinner Update, which is my website, because that's the only way they can find out what really happened on certain things.
So it sounds like there's a lot of misrepresentation.
Yeah.
Probably an understatement, huh?
Well, look, I'll give you an example of something happened to me. Even when I started talking about this, I remember being scared to follow Julie Bindel on Twitter. Julie Bindel is like a long-time campaigner for women in prison, abused women, and lesbian rights. And I remember thinking, no, I better not follow her. That'll really get me into trouble. And I didn't know why, right? And I just checked it out, and it was just the same story as me. They just call her a bigot, and they call her a bigot so many times. It just takes. There's a newspaper in London run by a bloke whose husband was a trustee at Mermaids. They've written 71 hit pieces on me, over however many years, 6 years. This is the same magazine that wrote 42 hit pieces on J.K. Rowling in a single week. 42 hit pieces in a single. That's 7 hit pieces a day for 7 days. That's why people hate J.K. Rowling. They don't even know why. They just have an idea, oh, she did something wrong. But they don't know what it is. It is a complete propaganda blitz about people like me who believe in the importance of biological sex.
It sounds like the activists who propagate this extreme kind of stuff are different to transgender people that do just want to live their lives free from discrimination.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really takes not very many people to control the discourse around an issue. And what we have at the moment is we have Wikipedia editors, journalists installed in various different places. In the UK, it would be Pink News, the Metro, the Independent, the Guardian. And they're just all singing from the same hymn sheet. And if you're the type of person, I think that I used to be this type of person. I'm no longer this type of person. But if you're the type of person who has a favorite title of a newspaper and it's all you read, you could go without knowing anything about this issue. Like the WPATH files were released on the 5th of March. So that's a month. The BBC hasn't mentioned them. BBC hasn't even mentioned them. And they prove that WPATH, which is supposed to be the world leader on trans healthcare, is making it up as they go along. There is no science behind this. There's no medicine behind this. This is an experiment on children.
Yeah, that rhetoric is... I mean, I've also heard you say, on your Twitter, like castrating children and mutilating young people's bodies. I'm wondering if that rhetoric, if you truly believe that, this is not helping young people, I'm wondering if that rhetoric is helpful to your cause. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. But there's a problem in that it is true. That's the problem. But
you're using loaded language, right?
Yeah, but how else are you supposed to talk about, like, look, I'll give you an example. There's a drug, Lupron, right? Lupron is the drug they gave, what's his name? Can't remember his name. it'll come back to me. Anyway, he was like a British hero, invented the code breaking machine that defeated the Nazis. Okay. So anyway, the war ends, goes into the 50s. He is a gay man. He gets caught in some sort of police sting in a toilet or something like that. And they give him a choice. He can either go to prison or they can give him Lupron. Lupron will chemically castrate him. He won't be a problem anymore and they'll forget about it. So he takes Lupron. It destroys his sexuality. He, I think, eventually killed himself. I'm not sure, but I think he killed himself. Anyway, that's the same drug they're giving kids now. Lupron is the drug they're giving kids and adults. It's the cross-sex hormone that completely destroys their ability to have sex.
Is that different from puberty blockers?
I think so. I'm not sure whether Lupron I think it might be the same as puberty blockers. I have to look into that better. But I asked someone about it, and someone said, no. Someone tried to pick me up, and they said Lupron isn't the same drug. It is the same drug. It's just called something different now because they don't want it to be associated with what they did to this guy. What is his name? Oh, it drives me mad. So Alan Turing. That's it. Yes, Alan Turing. That was his name. I'm not sure whether it's cross-sex hormones or whether it's. I think it's puberty blockers. So puberty blockers are drugs that are given to end-stage cancer patients and paedophiles in the case of paedophiles, to chemically castrate them. So I know this language is horrible and I know it's upsetting, but my thing is it's an emergency. It has to be stopped.
So you are like alarmist in a sense of like, this is really not the right thing for young people who believe that they're the opposite sex.
And I wouldn't call myself alarmist. I would say I'm exactly the right level of alarm.
That is so interesting because I know transgender people and they just believe they're the opposite sex and none of this activist crap. I promise you, like, they're not trying to date lesbians. They're not trying to tell us that we're fetishizing the vagina or trying to get into women's spaces. Like any of that. They literally just want to be left alone, have access to the healthcare that they believe that they need.
Absolutely. But you see, what I used to say to people is, if your nice trans friend is someone who wouldn't do any of those things, I'm not talking about them. I'm only talking about the people who do these things. And what they've done is they've successfully made it sound like I'm talking about every trans person in the world, when I'm not. I'm only talking about abusive trans women, like, as I think Eddie Izzard is abusive. Because I think if you go into a women's toilet when, you look like a man in a pink beret, then there's that great phrase I've heard, the good men stay out so the bad men stand out. And what he's doing by going into women's toilets is he's making it harder for women to challenge men in their spaces. I don't know if you saw, but in Portland, Oregon, there was a woman who's got a 2-year suspended sentence for challenging a male in the female toilets, You know what I mean?
Stop. It's just like, it's almost like it's not even related to transgender people.
Yeah.
How do we start
absolutely.
differentiating though? Because online you're kind of seen as like one dimensional, right? Like it's.
I would say that I am, definitely fixated on this issue, but it's only because I think the stakes are so high. They just found out, the Mayo Clinic just found out that puberty blockers are giving, young boys, testicle cancer. Now I had that. It's no joke, And the other thing about it is that all the medical aspect to it is things like osteoporosis, early onset menopause. These are things, none of these kids are not being told these facts. And all I would say is, rather than trying to get me to temper my language or chill things out, I'd ask if more people just stood up and spoke about it and said, hang on a sec, let's look at the facts, let's see what's really happening, and let's try and mitigate it all so that we can have a grown-up conversation about it. I wouldn't have to be so obsessed. I wouldn't have to be so single-minded about it. But the problem is, from the moment I started speaking about it, I was alone, and I lost all my friends, I lost my marriage, I lost my livelihood. I haven't written comedy in 6 years. Why should I have gone through all that?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the question. You've lost essentially everything by talking about this issue. What is it that makes it so worth it for you?
Children are being hurt. Children are being hurt. Children are being, look at Jazz Jennings. They operated on Jazz Jennings on a reality TV show. Millions of people watched the operation happen. The surgeons were arguing during the operation. Have you ever seen surgeons argue during an operation? That's because it is so experimental that they disagreed on what they were doing. He left the operating room. 2 or 3 days later, the whole thing burst. He was in intense pain. They had to do it again. He is now a extremely overweight, incredibly unhappy young man who probably would have turned out to be gay. And instead, he has been gaslit by his parents, his family, the reality TV show people, his doctors, into believing that he's a woman. And it's not true. It's a terrible, terrible lie that's been told to him. It's shortened his life. It's made him terribly unhealthy. We got to stop it. It's got to be like the big thing about it is these procedures and operations. You could argue about whether they're necessary at all, but they should certainly be the last step in a process. They should be, okay, we tried this, we tried therapy, we tried investigating whether you're gay, we tried all these things. You're still unhappy, you're still frightened, you're still feeling uncomfortable in your body. Maybe it's time to talk about these other measures. I actually don't think it's ever time to talk about them. I think it should be kept for extremely rare cases. But at the moment, we're in a situation where it's called early affirmation. Basically, someone comes in, they say, I feel like a girl. Okay, you're a girl. Here's the puberty blockers.
Whoa. Okay, come on. That's exaggerated. Like, I've heard from plenty of transgender people, it's not that easy to get puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. They have to wait on lists for years and years and years. Like,
sure, but there's black mark. The things that Susie Green was able to do to her son was get black market drugs, and as a result, she gave him these puberty blockers until he was 16 years old. And the moment he hit 16, she took him on a plane to Thailand, and they had the operation. This is probably someone who would have been a young, happy gay person, and instead they're something in between, because Susie Green and Susie Green's husband were homophobes. They actually, there's a famous TED talk that I suggest you track down, and she's talking about it, and she's got the TED talk microphone and the hand gestures, and she's, the way you've seen it in a million other things. And she said she had this little boy, and they were very worried because he was playing with girls' toys and he was wearing girls' dresses. My husband didn't like it. She actually says this. And then there's nothing until there's no explanation of it beyond that. She only gives that reason. Girls' toys, girls' dresses, they hid the toys from him. And he was so distressed that they couldn't do that. So they thought, well, what will we do? We'll give him hormones and then cut his penis off. It's I know it's kind of mine, but we call it being Pete, like there's people who kind of think, and and also the way that the conversation is patrolled means that they've made it very high stakes for you if you were to realize on camera here that what I'm saying is true, or to come over to my side on the issue. But it shouldn't be high stakes when it comes to the health of children, the happiness of people who are confused and have body dysphoria issues. We have to follow the science. We have to have conversations. It's the thing that's hardest to talk about it, and it should be the easiest because of the stakes are so high.
I don't want to keep going back and forth with you, but I just want to say, I just know so many trans people that are, it's like, don't want you to watch this, but are happy.
Sure.
And have they had science
procedures? Have they had puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones?
And there's probably science on their side to say, like, this was the best thing for my mental health.
I think if you look at the WPATH files, you will see that all the science is built on very shaky ground. There's a joke that I always think of. It's a guy who jumps off a building because he thinks he can survive jumping off the building. And at every floor, he says, so far, so good. That's what trans medicine is. It may not be telling now, but long term, there's so much bad stuff associated with it. You know, men don't realize that multiple sclerosis is a side effect of these drugs. Women don't realize that osteoporosis is a side effect of these drugs. Have you noticed all the people who have walking sticks and walkers and wheelchairs? You know, it may not be true every time, but some of the time it's because their bones are brittle.
Okay, let's say there's some truth to what you're saying. You know, this is like, we should be concerned about young people. I mean, why should we talk about it? Like, why? I don't even know why I'm talking about it and risking, you know?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I would say because you love your friends, right? You know, you don't want your friends to be hurt. You don't want your friends to be misinformed. But the way that activists have made this conversation so difficult to have, to such an extent that, you know, you sometimes have that physical reaction. It's not good, and it's not good for your friends, you know.
But which friends though? Because I just explained I had like lots of transgender friends.
Yeah,
will probably be hurt by a lot of the things you've said. Do you realize that?
Why would they be hurt? I only want them to be happy and safe.
But if they've already transitioned, it's like you're making it sound like they've made a huge mistake. Yeah, it is quite a
It's a complicated
abrasive thing
one.
to say.
It's a complicated one. Look, all I can say is, you know, it's not an issue with your friends. It's an issue with how much they've been told, what they've been told, the medicine behind a lot of the decisions they may be making. All that stuff has to be examined properly. What I would argue is if they're early on in the process, they should really, really look into it. You know, if they've gone through the process completely, again, they should just look into it, because a lot of doctors. Here's another thing that happens. This is kind of like, imagine this in a more medical setting, not a therapeutic setting. But one therapist wrote to me, and she said that young trans-identified children come into her, and they are in despair because they've been told that their favorite author wants them to die. Okay, J.K. Rowling. And she said, I can't tell them that it's not true, because if I do, they might report me to my accreditation body, and I might lose my license to practice, because these kids have been told that anyone who disagrees with them is a bigot and you have to report them. You know, so this psychiatrist is sitting there therapist is sitting there unable to help these kids because the consequences of doing so have been made so terrible by trans rights activists. You know, and these kids need help. These kids need help more than, you know, the person I described who's painting their fingernails black and calling themselves non-binary, you know?
Yeah, I wonder if we've talked a lot about the extremes. I mean, to bring more nuance into it, just to ignore the extremes, it seems like the extremes are pushing everyone around in this culture war.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yes. And if we want to find out what's best for our friends who are going through very difficult journeys, we have to follow the science. And the science around this issue alone is bunk. It's all bullshit. You know, it's built on things like, you know, the suicide thing, that's built on a study that is so weak that it's laughable. It was a self-selected group of people who, like, you ask any group of young people.
Are you talking about the study that says that transgender people have a higher rate of suicide?
Yes.
Okay. So that's not.
It's not a substantial, it's not a robust study, you know. And also, when you think about it, if you ask any group of young people if they've ever thought of suicide, what kind of young person would you be if you hadn't? You know? Yeah,
true that. Okay, so, I mean, I kind of asked you a lot here, but I think it's more important to be, you know, compassionate to people as opposed to using all this language, like you castrating yourself or mutilation and... Well, is there anything that could make you reconsider your views or turn you towards a more compassionate approach?
Well, I disagree that it's not compassionate. We, you know, when I got into this, I don't like to use words. I certainly have tried to avoid using certain words. But when I was tempering my language, it was just to say, and look at J.K. Rowling. What is she? She doesn't use the kind of language I use, you know, but she's still being destroyed. You know,
because she's quite famous, though.
Sorry?
She's quite, like, more famous.
Sure. But like I have tried to speak softly. I have tried to tiptoe around this subject. I've tried everything I could think of, and it didn't matter. Pink News and publications like that set out to destroy me by saying that what I was saying was bigoted and evil, and I wanted trans people to die and all this sort of thing. And the last 6 years has just been me trying to fight back against this fake picture of myself that's being drawn up by activists. You know.
It's interesting, like, looking at your Twitter
Yeah.
and actually being here with you, because it doesn't seem like it is coming to from a malicious place, even though I can understand why transgender people would be hurt by you.
I don't know. I like, you know, I give it both barrels on Twitter, but only people who are coming at me and calling me a bigot and making jokes about my divorce and also hurting my friends, you know, who are usually gay, vast majority lesbian, you know, and lots of trans people as well. Like one of the biggest trans activists in Ireland is a straight married guy who was telling everybody, you know, like trans people would be arguing with him, and he would be saying terrible things about them. It's an ideological battle. It's not a battle about. It's not an ethical battle. It's an ideological battle. The people I hate are the ideologues. You know, I don't, you know, and I also hate the form of activism that has grown up around this issue, which is so violent and is designed to make us all frightened to speak, you know. And I thought, okay, I've lost everything. Everything's gone down the shitter. I might as well just keep being a big rock in the road for these people, you know, because there's not very many of us. You know, we tend to have our meetings shut down. You know, in Melbourne, I had a load of events cancelled. Luckily, we had second places set up. But you just got to ask yourself, why are they so frightened of hearing me do what we just did here today? Why do they want to keep me on Twitter with only Twitter as my only way of expressing myself? You know?
Yeah. I suppose I kind of want to ask, you've gone from this beloved comedy writer to this hated for your quote-unquote anti-trans views. Mm-hmm. What has life been like for you since you've been sort of painted that way?
Well, it's been five or six very difficult years. But, you know, I lost something and I gained something else. COVID was tough. I was on my own during COVID. But we did this show. I do a show with a English feminist named Helen Staniland, who, when you're over in London, I'll introduce you to. You'll love her. And a Canadian gay guy called Artie Morty called The Mess We're In, which was about this issue. And we just wanted to show that it was possible to talk about it, possible to be funny about it without hurting people. And sure enough, what's interesting about it is usually trans activists, they like to get little excerpts and take them out of context and show me to be a bigot or whatever it happens to be. And they have a lot of trouble with it. You know, I've only seen two things taken out. One, when my son came to give me a present on screen, and they made it look like I was a terrible father because I was like, I'm doing the podcast. You know, so they can't really get us on what we say. They can only get us on what they say we're saying. You know, so anyway, yeah. So even though it was tough for me, I believe the podcast was a big thing for a lot of other people who felt they were going mad and felt they were very lonely and didn't understand what was happening, and it apparently helped a lot of people through a difficult time. So even if it was tough for me, I'm very proud that I helped other people kind of survive it all, you know, because especially during COVID, when it was even harder to speak to people and to connect with them, it was a tough time. And it's when the movement was at its craziest. You know?
Yeah. Okay. So we've kind of already answered this, but like, I guess what is the prime sort of way to be compassionate towards people amidst all the crazy culture war stuff? Because it kind of feels like, I mean, I know we've talked about transgender activists, but it sort of feels like people I know just want to be loving and compassionate, and then maybe people on your end sort of want to sort of be more in line with the truth and reality. Like, how do we have both?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. I think that's an interesting framing, but I'm not sure it's entirely accurate because the people I know are all extremely compassionate, you know? Like, I'll give you an example. One of my favorite people in the world is a woman named Tish, and her son she and her son are in this, like, day by day battle to stop him from transitioning, you know? He's been convinced by everything he's read, by all the kind of pink news articles and so on, that this will make him happy. She knows, or at least she thinks anyway, I'll put it like that he's just a gay man, you know, and that he will be happy if he accepts that and he moves on from it. But I don't know, he seems determined to remove his genitals, and it's kind of a race against time, you know? So I don't know, all I do is I try and put the information out there on my blog, in the book. I try to put a lot of stuff to try and make people see it outside of the framing that we've been provided so far, much of the time by activists, you know. Like, for instance, I'd say that your friends, the ones you love, they've been as influenced as everyone else by this stuff and by the way the debate has been framed. But for their own sake and the sake of others they may speak to and others they may talk to about this issue, they have to know the facts. You know, and the facts are, I don't know, they're scary and they're not nice. Some people are, but it's better to know them than find out about them when they happen to you. I mean, you know, it's funny, but once people hear the actual positions rather than the positions as they've been reported, and YouTube interviews are a really good way of doing it because you can explore the grey areas.
Yeah, I'm wondering if I came across naive. Oh, look, mate, I appreciate you coming and letting me, you know, interview you. And I think I really just wanted to understand where you were coming from. And yeah, I'll probably get the other side eventually.
Yeah.
But I appreciate you.
Well, I hope you do. And, you know, if ever anyone wants to, if you, like, one of the first things when I was cancelled from Melbourne, like it was a comedy class I was supposed to do. And I said it at the time. There were all these trans comedians who said they wouldn't do it if I did it. And I said to them, can I speak to them? Can I explain my position? And they said no. You know? Yeah,
well, that's what I'm struggling with. I'm struggling to get, like, I want a really, like, lefty, progressive, non-binary trans person. But I think them putting themselves out there, they sort of just get a lot of hate online. And I was like, why would you go online and defend yourself? Like, you're obviously defending your position because you're being hassled, but oh well, we'll see. I'll probably put it out there and just see what happens.
Okay. Well, you know, just keep yourself safe. That's the important thing. I'm serious.
Yeah,
you know?
I'm an aspiring comedian, so we'll see.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it was a good interview. I wouldn't be worried about it. I think it was interesting.
People listen as well. I'm just like,
do you know what? As well as that, it's really useful for me to hear what people, you know, the way I'm seen, you know, and you know, I'm already, believe it or not, slightly careful about how I phrase certain things. But you know, my enemy is not trans people. My enemy are the doctors, the activists, and the influencers who are, you know, just lying to.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that would stop people seeing you as the enemy is that language.
Sure.
Child mutilation.
I know.
But I mean,
mutilation is a bad one. I do try and avoid that. But I don't know. I think I look at all the thousands of girls who are crowdfunding to get double mastectomies on crowdfunding sites, and I just want to stop it. I want to stop it by any means possible, you know. So you're right. Maybe the language is harsh, but I don't know. Maybe if you look back at it as well, you'll see I don't use that type of framing.
Well, not here. You didn't use mutilation.
Yeah, but even online, I am a little bit careful. I mean, if you did sometimes the anger does stretch out, but it's the doctors I'm angry with, not with not the survivors, not the victims of the doctors, you know.
No worries. Oh, well, see where we go. Thank you so much, Graham Linehan.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.